New Orleans Saints quarterback Tyler Shough leads, but isn't the only team MVP candidate for 2026.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, and on today's episode, we're brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where new customers can turn $5 into $150 in bonus bets by winning your first $5 bet over at FanDuel.com. Carl Granderson, New Orleans Saints defensive end, faces a must-breakout season. Safety Jonas Sanker may be the team's frontrunner inside the building to take over the star slot role. And Tyler Shough might lead, but won't be the only team MVP candidate going into this season. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you, so let's get into it. Yeah, Tyler Shough, the quarterback, is always, of course, going to lead off conversations around who could potentially be the team's MVP going into the 2026 season. Now, please bear in mind that what I'm talking about here is team MVP, not league MVP. Two different things. I'm talking about the most valuable player for the team. And while Tyler Shough absolutely is going to be the front runner for that conversation going into the 2026 season, there is intrigue outside of Tyler Shough in the conversation. Why does Tyler Shough lead the conversation? Well, it's simple. Obviously, he plays the quarterback conversation, and nothing says MVP like a QB designation when it comes to your position. But it's more than that, right? He's also a stellar player, right? Great leader, as well as we've seen, has the sort of attitude, and I'm going to borrow a Dennis Allen-ism, if I may repurpose it, moxie, because I think you're actually seeing what moxie looks like when it comes to Tyler Shough, as opposed to the original example of Jake Haener. And so I think that you see all of that when it comes to Tyler Shough off the field, but also on the field. Great play. Somebody that can use his legs to extend plays, has the mobility to go out there and not just extend plays with his legs, but make plays with his legs, can make every throw on the football field, has the NFL arm, NFL size, all of the things that you would typically want to see from a player that would be considered the most valuable player for their specific club, organization, franchise, team, roster. And so that is why Tyler Shough, of course, is at the top of that conversation. He is the person that has effectively helped, not alone, but has helped to bring back a lot of optimism for this New Orleans Saints franchise. And he deserves his credit for how he has helped to bring that optimism back. But he's not the only player that should be considered in the who's going to be the team's MVP prediction conversation as we get closer and closer to the 2026 season, which of course still has OTAs, mandatory minicamp, training camp to go, but lots of opportunity for people to get excited about what should be an exciting 2026 New Orleans Saints season. I think the other two candidates that are worth thinking of very highly in this regard are edge rusher Chase Young and running back Travis Etienne Jr. Let me start off with the running back, because I think we know why Chase Young is that guy. I'm not going to leave him entirely out of the conversation. We will break that down. But I wanted to highlight some of my thoughts on Travis Etienne Jr., because when I was originally coming into this conversation, which is really just kind of like a fun way to look at, like, okay, so who are the big ticket players going into 2026? The other name that was consistently there was Chris Olave, right? Chris Olave had a career year last season. He had 100 receptions, over 1,100 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns. Only missed that last game due to that weird blood clot situation, not an on-field injury situation. Very, very different there. Conversations continue around extensions, guarantee talk, I'm sure, is a big part of that, and all those other things. But for right now, it would be foolish to leave Chris Olave entirely out of the conversation. But, you know, when we left the 2025 season, the three guys that were in conversation as the MVPs for the year were Tyler Shough, Chris Olave, Chase Young. And so in thinking about, okay, so who's the other person, right? Who's the player I'm not thinking about? Travis Etienne Jr. quickly snapped into my mind as like, oh, yeah, that's probably one of those pieces because of a couple of different things. First of all, we know Kellen Moore's offenses work at their best when there is a reliable run game. And therefore, putting together a reliable run game helps to elevate what the entire offense can do. And if the Saints are going to have the improved rushing attack that they want to have in 2026, coming off of a season where they were 31st in yards per attempt average, sub 4 yards per attempt, which is usually kind of the benchmark there, it's going to be because, and make no mistake about it, of the addition of players like Travis Etienne Jr. and David Edwards on the offensive line. Now, David Edwards is not going to be recognized as an MVP player, right? That's not going to happen. That's not the way that offensive linemen are often looked at least outside of the facility. And so you look at a player like Travis Etienne Jr., the one who would be toting the rock, as they say. That would be the player that would be kind of singled out as like, oh, that's an MVP caliber player. This is a guy that has had over 1,000 rushing yards in three of his 4 seasons, right? 3 of his 4 seasons over in Jacksonville, who can catch passes out of the backfield as well and add more capabilities that way, more yardage, more game impact, all those other things, and is a solid protector out of the backfield as well, keeping your quarterback clean so that he can deliver some of those passes to the wide receivers, tight ends, and other possible backs that could be on the field. Because I do think there's a world in which, as long as Alvin Kamara is on the roster in 2026, you can see both Alvin Kamara and Travis Etienne Jr. on the field at the same time. I think that would be a pretty fun thing for the Saints to look at exploring, along with the NFL-wide push to 12 personnel, 13 personnel, meaning 2 tight end, 3 tight end sets. First number is the number of running backs. Second number is the number of tight ends. 12, 1, 2, 13, 1, 3. You get it. And so I look at Travis Etienne Jr. as a player who can have the statistic season that garners attention as a team MVP if he tops 1,500 total yards, for instance, yards from scrimmage, combined rushing and receiving. That'll be an easy piece for him to be a part of that conversation. If he gets close to double-digit touchdowns in total, it would be a while before the Saints have had a backfield player contribute that much to the scoreboard as well. So that's a place where you can potentially have that impact, but also because of the threat that he would present as a rusher that's going to do things like open up games like the RPO game and the play action game, as well as the zone read keeper game, which you've already seen Tyler Shough excel in. You go back to that Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, for instance, last year. And also just helps in terms of keeping your quarterback clean out of the backfield. So I think that a guy like Travis Etienne Jr. could scratch the itch of the statistical needs for an MVP season, but also provide all of the other pieces that aren't necessarily intangibles, but are often glossed over and not seen on the stat sheet to also help you feel like, oh yeah, that guy absolutely helped to change how the New Orleans Saints offense looked under Kellen Moore in 2026. So I wanted to elevate Travis Etienne Jr. in that conversation a bit as well. But there's no position outside of quarterback that can take over a game in the fourth quarter and in crunch time like the edge rusher. And that is where Chase Young comes in. One of the most interesting things that I found going back and looking at Chase Young's season last year was over the course of weeks 14, 15, and 16, I believe it was. He totaled 9 pressures and 2.5 sacks in the fourth quarter. Just the fourth quarter of those 3 games. And so his ability to be able to impact the game late in the season as the defense was settling in, as he was settling into his role or had gotten settled into his role, that is a perfect example of why a player like Chase Young should also be considered as a potential MVP candidate because of his ability to impact the end of a football game. 17-17 tied against the Carolina Panthers. What did Chase Young do? He got a sack on 1st and 10 that stalled the Carolina Panthers and eventually would give the ball back to the Saints for a win. And so I think you look at the impact of a player like Chase Young, and of course we won't leave him out of that conversation either. But Tyler Shough, not alone, although in the lead as a quarterback for the conversation of team MVP going into 2026. Another player that was really impressive last season, especially down the stretch as he settled into his new situation and system, was safety Jonas Sanker, who may as well be the club's frontrunner to take over the slot star position. I'll explain why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Indeed. There's always a lot going on in your workplace, whether it's chaos inside the workplace, overflowing inboxes, just assignments stacking up on your calendar as well. But don't let that really important hire that you know you need to get right kind of skate on by. Go ahead and check out our friends over at Indeed, because if you're looking to hire, that's a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. A lot of folks will let those really important job posts just get put up on random job sites, those other job sites, and just hope that somebody stumbles upon them. Don't do that. Head over to Indeed.com and check out Indeed sponsored jobs. They're going to make sure that your job gets the premium positioning that it deserves. In fact, worldwide, companies just like yours are going to end up making 27 hires according to Indeed's data during the minute that I'm telling you about Indeed right now. So don't get lost in the sauce. Head over right now where you can get $75 in sponsored job credit by heading over to Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? That's a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. All right, family. New Orleans Saints safety Jonas Sanker is ready for an expanded role in the New Orleans Saints defense, but it might not be at the same position that he played in 2025 during his rookie year. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show. For those of you that are interested and want ad-free, this show not interrupted, you can go and check us out over at lockedonsaints.supercast.com or click the link in the description to learn more about our Everydayer Club, where you can get this show ad-free without interruption every single day. Go ahead and check that out. Again, link in the description for more information on that. Just like $5 a month to get the show ad-free, basically. So New Orleans is in search still of a really important role in Brandon Staley's defense. And the reason why I'm stressing that it's a really important role, that star slot role. Remember, when I say star, I don't mean like superstar, like star player, jazz hands. That's not what I mean. What I mean by star is kind of like the same way we say Mike, Will, Sam, Buck, things like that. This position, star, is like that. It's just the name for a position that is played by some player in some defenses, typically Vic Fangio derived systems and things like that. And of course, Brandon Staley, Vic Fangio, like that's the same coaching tree. And so Staley has his version of that role, the star slot role, where you're playing slot corner, but sometimes you play on the outside, sometimes you're dropping back into coverage, sometimes you're defending the run, sometimes you're kind of a nickel linebacker, sometimes you're rushing the passer. Like there's just a little bit of everything that you do in those. And so in looking at that role in particular, that was Alontae Taylor's role last year. He, of course, signed with the Tennessee Titans, and now the role has not been addressed. The Saints have not signed anybody that feels like a really natural fit in that position. They did not go out of their way to grab somebody in the draft, although Mickey Loomis, New Orleans Saints general manager, did confirm after day 3 of the draft, and that is something they were looking to do early on, but were not able to do that. Perhaps tangentially related or specifically related. He also confirmed that there were conversations at the top of day 2 of trying to move up. So perhaps those two things were related to one another. They were trying to move up to go and get the player that they wanted, and that player, went off the board early. There were a couple of players that kind of went in that range that would have made sense for New Orleans, not the least of which being Arizona's Traden Stukes, so obviously would have been a great fit for New Orleans and that role, considering he basically played it while he was over at Arizona. And since then, the Saints haven't really gone out of their way to go and, pursue somebody or throw a bunch of money at somebody to come to New Orleans to take over the role. That must mean they are actually, and did mean it when they said it, which again, we can take things at face value at this point in the offseason, that there's somebody in-house that they feel really good about that can take that role, or options in-house they feel really good about that anybody could take that role. Now, the one thing that I'll say before I dive into the Jonas Sanker of it all and why I think he might be that player, is that previous experience at the position isn't necessarily necessary. I'll remind you that Alontae Taylor did not play in the slot while he was in college. Period. Played like 60-something snaps in the slot during his entire collegiate career at Tennessee, and then kind of was taught that role in Dennis Allen's version, and then that role kind of expanded and changed a bit when it got into Brandon Staley's system, and I thought that he played well there. Now, there's a lot of things that you can look at when it comes to Alontae Taylor, amongst the most catches, amongst the most receiving yards given up and surrendered in coverage out of any cornerback from the time that he was drafted on. But when you're playing in that slot role, you're going to allow catches. You're going to allow yards because you're playing in space. Your role isn't necessarily one that puts you in the greatest of positions to go out there and get a bunch of interceptions and do all that kind of stuff. And so it's not necessary for you to have previous experience there. You've got to be good at a litany of things, however. You have to be fine in coverage, at least. You have to be adequate as a run stopper. You have to be excellent as a tackler. And it certainly helps if you can produce as a pass rusher as well, which doesn't necessarily mean getting off of or shedding blocks, but do you have an understanding of pursuit angles, how to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible? Can you run an arc? Do you have the body control? Can you finish when you get to the quarterback and actually make that play? All those things. And those are all things that Alontae Taylor, by all intents and purposes, was elite at doing in the pass rushing, piece of this equation, of this thing. And so the reason why I look at Jonas Sanker as a potential perfect fit there is because it's not too terribly dissimilar from what it is that he did during his time at Virginia. Remember, this is a player that's only 1 year out of college. He had a stellar rookie season where he got better and better and better. And then he had a little bit of a struggle point in the middle, as the team described, but then got better and better and better. Usually when you hit that rookie wall, you don't break through. And then that's kind of what the story of your rookie season. Jonas Sanker broke through that wall and kept getting better. And so there's an argument to be made there of like, well, then why changed his role? He was almost exclusively a free safety throughout the season. Not exclusively, I shouldn't say it that way, but the vast majority of his snaps were spent playing in zone coverage away from the line of scrimmage. But he has the ability to play close to the line of scrimmage. He clearly has the tackling acumen. I think you can see that littered all over his rookie tape. And the pass rush side of it is something you can develop and learn. And he certainly has the tenacity and the football IQ to be able to understand things like pursuit angles and all those pieces. And so him being that player does make a lot of sense. And when you go back to his Virginia days in college, it makes kind of even more sense. He played over 500 snaps throughout his career at free safety, in the slot, and in the box. And those are kind of the three boxes that if you can check those three boxes, you can fit there. I think he's personally my favorite fit in terms of who's on the roster right now. But I also understand the argument of like, hey, he had a really good rookie season doing a thing. Let him keep doing that thing. That is where Julian Blackmon, who the Saints signed on a 1-year extension, a very good move by New Orleans before free agency began, to stay in New Orleans. And that is another player that gives you an opportunity there. You go back to his 2023 season where he played over 900 snaps with the Indianapolis Colts defense, really 2022 and 2023, but I'm going to focus on 2023 because a lot of people consider 2023 Blackmon's best season. 4 interceptions, allowed a passer rating of like just barely over 50, 57 point whatever, win target, I think it was like 57.4, whatever it is. He effectively played that role, played over 100 snaps in the slot, in the box, and at free safety. And this was at the same time, by the way, that another player that I think the Saints should pursue, Kenny Moore, who is now a free agent and has split officially with the Indianapolis Colts. He played in the same defense as Kenny Moore that season, and Kenny Moore played a lot in the slot and at free safety. Didn't play as much in the box. That kind of became Julian Blackmon's role. And so I think if the Saints aren't going to go and get Kenny Moore, which I do think would be a good move by them, at least on a 1-year deal, maybe even a 2-year deal, something short term, right? He's 30 plus, all those other things. And like my knees hurt. I can only imagine how a professional athlete that has been, experiencing like what's the equivalent of multiple car accidents every Sunday can look like or feel like. We're not the same, not even close. And so like this piece of it though does show that like, yeah, going after Kenny Moore makes a ton of sense for this team. However, there are still some options on the roster. And I think Jonas Sanker is paramount among them, but obviously Julian Blackmon feels pretty good there too. Let me know who you think should take over the Saints star/slot role, because there's also the Quincy Riley element of this too, especially after the signing of Martin Emerson Jr. All right, coming up next, the New Orleans Saints need a breakout season from Carl Granderson and one that is consistent. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Both the Eastern and Western Conference Finals finally set over in the NBA playoffs. If you want to get in on either of those series or you want to jump ahead as well, get a look at maybe potential finals odds with the Oklahoma City Thunder, the current favorite. You can get in on all of that over at FanDuel today. You can also get the New Orleans Saints win total set right now to 7.5. I might take more on that right now. Definitely go and check them out today over on FanDuel. You can also build parlays on some of these basketball games so you can win an even bigger payout and much more. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 for your first bet. And if that first $5 bet wins, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. There's no better place to turn $5 into $150 than with FanDuel today. Go and check them out over at FanDuel.com. That's where you're going to want to go to get started. Turn $5 into $150 over at FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are in need of a breakout season from edge rusher Carl Granderson. We appreciate you very much as always making us your first listen. The Pelicans still have not announced their new head coach. If you want to hear why you shouldn't be panicking about that, a great explainer from our good friend Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans. Go and check him out over at Locked On Pelicans for your second listen today. Part of the #1 sports podcast network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can also catch us during the 10 a.m. hour each day over on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. The New Orleans Saints need a breakout season from Carl Granderson, and one that is consistent. At the time that I'm recording this episode, Cam Jordan remains a free agent. Had 10.5 sacks last season with the Saints, but up to this point has not made the decision to return to New Orleans, or the Saints haven't made the decision to re-sign him, whichever one it is, right? The Saints have been pretty open and honest about the fact that they want Cam Jordan back. The question is, can they offer him the role? And if they can't offer him a role that's going to bring him back to New Orleans, then that means they need to get the most out of Carl Granderson and finally get a consistent season from the edge rusher, who usually starts the season strong and ends the season strong, performing extremely well in September, December, and January. But oftentimes it's the October, November months, believe it or not, that show you a pretty steep decline or at least drop off in production. Now, Carl Granderson has talked about this before. Going into just a few seasons ago, he and I had a whole back and forth exchange during a press conference about his awareness of needing to start hot and stay hot throughout a season and the things that he was doing to improve that. So far, the results haven't necessarily been there. And that's not just me making a judgment. That's not just me saying things out loud. Let me give you the numbers that back this up. Thanks to our friends over at True Media, it's very easy for us to take a look at monthly production over the course of a player's career. Carl Granderson has been a New Orleans Saint since the 2019 season. So looking over the course of 2019 through 2025, we can look at his production in September, October, November, December, and January each year. Now, it's worth remembering that in January, of course, he plays the least amount of games, as every player in the NFL does when it comes to regular season statistics. Only 8 regular season games as opposed to 21, 27, 21, and 28 in the order of September, October, November, December. So let's take a look at some of the numbers here that give us a little bit of the story. Looking over the course of every September that Carl Granderson has played, his sacks in September, 11.5. His sacks in December, 8.5. He's got 34 career sacks. So 11.5 in September, 8.5 in December. If you want to add a little bit of January into the mix, 5 sacks over the course of just 8 games played in January as well. So starting the season strong, finishing the season strong within the context of the number of games that are played during those months. So remember, I said 21 games in September, 28 games in December. Not far from that, 27 games in October, 21 games in November. So if we're just looking at September and December, and we're just looking at October and November, we're talking about the difference of a single game here. So if we add up 11.5 and 8.5, that's going to give us a quick 20 sacks in terms of what it is that we have seen from Carl Granderson in September and December. If you're wondering, yes, I did slow down because I was making sure I got the math right, because it's a running joke on this show. 2 things. 1, I talk too fast for myself sometimes. 2, I don't do math well. But yes, 20 sacks. We did it. over the course of October and November, one fewer game, 5 sacks, 4.5 sacks, 9.5 sacks over the course of that part of the season. This has been a consistent thing with Carl Granderson, who needs to have a breakout season this year. Not necessarily because, oh, if he doesn't, then it'll be the end of his time in New Orleans. I'm not talking about him in that way. I just mean that, like, look, if the Saints aren't going to bring back Cam Jordan, or Cam Jordan's not going to come back to New Orleans, they're going to need something big from the other guy that has the most experience in the system, that has the most historical knowledge of this franchise and understanding of what it is the team is going to be looking for, and who has the most knowledge of rushing opposite Chase Young. And so he has all of that knowledge. This isn't just about sacks, though. We can look at pressure percentage. 12.4% in September, drops to 9 in October, bumps back up to 12.5 in November, drops to 11.9 in December before raising way up to his best 13% when it comes to January. Even his pressure numbers, 53 in September, but then a drop to 42 in both October and November. Not 42 total, 42 each, but then 74 total pressures in December. So skyrockets again. And on top of all that, only 8 games played in January, but has half the amount of pressures as 27 games played in October and 21 games played in November. So again, you're seeing the dip in consistency in the middle of the season and then a shoot back up towards the end of the year. And so we can look at tackles for a loss, tells a very similar story. Pressure to sack percentage tells a very similar story. Sack percentage tells a little bit of a similar story. 2.7 in September, drops to 1.1 in October, 1.3 in November. A slight rise to 1.4 in December, but not enough to really kind of like send anything home on that one. But it's clear that New Orleans is going to need a strong season from Carl Granderson, and finding a way to get it as consistently as possible is going to be his next big step for improvement. All right, family, time for a little bit of lanyard for the real ones who made it to this point in the episode. And this is for the real ones, because we're talking special teams. We're a pro special teams podcast. We understand the importance of that phase of the game, which I refuse to call the third phase of the game because it implies it as the least important phase of the game. That is not true. We talk about the hidden yardage game. We talk about things like average starting field position. We've always been pro special teams. And last year, the Saints had one of the worst special teams production seasons that they've had in a long time. Now, a lot of stuff changed personnel-wise, but Phil Galliano effectively ran the same system, the same scheme, with some, obvious adjustments and small adjustments and things like that throughout the year from what Darren Rizzi had installed in the seasons prior. And so now that the Saints are kind of going into a second year with a similar staff, or similar roster, same staff, similar roster, all of that, it's time to see if the Saints and Phil Galliano can get up to that next step and maintain that elite standard of special teams play that Galliano is carrying forward from Darren Rizzi. But there were like 2 or 3 returning players on the special teams unit last year. A lot changed last season. And that's one of the reasons why like Nephi Sewell started getting elevated and all these other things, so they can get a 4th player out there that knew the system and what it is that they were trying to do. But I like what the Saints have done this offseason in terms of helping themselves from a special teams perspective. We've talked about how Ryan Wright might be one of the most underrated free agency signings the Saints have had in some time, because they finally stopped going the undrafted free agent punter route and went the veteran proven punter route. So that should go a long way, but it doesn't stop there. The drafting of Barion Brown gives you a player that doesn't even have to catch a pass during training camp and is going to make the roster because of what he can do as an electrifying kick and punt returner. But beyond the return game, which, yes, the Saints could use some help in, it also is time to look at the coverage game. The Saints have lost JT Gray. They moved on from JT Gray. They moved on from Rico Payton. They moved on from players that were DeMarco Jackson, players that were elite coverage players for you in those areas of the game in terms of punt coverage, things like that. But a guy like Lorenzo Styles bringing his 4.27 speed and tackling acumen to the punt coverage unit could be a major win for New Orleans, paired with a guy with a big leg like Ryan Wright, allowing that 4.27 speed to win at the reception point or the fielding area for that punt returner. You bring in a guy like Xavier Harris, the undrafted free agent defensive tackle out of Ole Miss, who has a lot to prove off the field in terms of character and things like that. But if he can do that, blocked a combined 7 field goals and extra points during his collegiate career at Ole Miss with his 6'7" frame. All of a sudden, you have somebody else that can help you, along with Brian Brzee, to maybe cause some issues for long field goal attempts, knowing that the NFL is starting to lean towards long field goal attempts as opposed to short punts. And so the Saints have a lot of these new options, Ty Chandler, Barion Brown, and others that could potentially come in and help this team vastly improve in a very important area of the game in special teams, something we'll definitely be watching over the course of really the preseason, but we'll start to pick up some of the nuggets during training camp. All right, family, coming up in tomorrow's episode, a few more players that are in line for a breakout season in 2026. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me in the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know what the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.